was an idea
to bring together a group of remarkable people.
To see if we could become something more.
Hello, and welcome to Film Rant. I really don't know where to begin with this one. I guess I'll tell you a bit about the movie. So, Avengers Infinity War is the culmination of just about every Marvel movie since Iron Man back in 2008 as the Avengers find themselves threatened by Thanos. It's been labelled as the biggest crossover event in history, and aside from Assassin's Creed crossing with Final Fantasy 15, I have to say I agree. I mean, seriously, why the fuck did this happen? This movie had so many ways in which it could get it so drastically wrong. There's every Marvel hero in here, minus the Netflix guys, Ant-Man and Hawkeye, and each of these characters are beloved to different groups of fans. Like Star Wars, every superhero movie generally has a pretty divisive fan base. Black Panther might be held in certain people's hearts but not others. Iron Man might be who people sided with in Civil War, others might have sided with Captain America. Because every hero has their own place in certain pockets of the audience. It is a gargantuan task for the directors of this movie, the Russo Brothers, to give each hero the time and writing they need to be portrayed properly and accurately. Not only that, but Marvel has got a lot more thematic lately. Guardians has a very light-hearted and funny tone, whereas Captain America has gone quite gritty and dark. So Infinity War has to find a way to blend all of these styles together while juggling an abundance of main roster heroes and introduce a new villain to make him interesting. This is undoubtedly one of the most difficult films ever made in recent years, and even if it was bad, I'd still have to applaud the sheer balls and audacity it would have took to try and take on such a task. But guys, it isn't bad. It's not bad at all. In fact, it's absolutely fucking astounding. I'm going to talk about how, but I'm also going to go into spoilers, so be aware of that before continuing on. Normally when I do my reviews, I do them in a structured way. I talk about the characters, then story, then the technical aspects of the movie, but this movie is just so big and there's so much to talk about that I'm just going to talk and see what happens. As Prince once said, forgive me if it goes astray. Thanos is without doubt the best Marvel villain yet. The Russo brothers and the writers have managed to avoid making him this big powerful prick who just comes from nowhere and wants to spit in everybody's porridge. Although his introduction is simply him beating the shit out of the Hulk by slamming him into the ground in exactly the same way the Hulk slammed puny god Loki into the ground in Avengers 1, asserting his physical power, Thanos actually has a motivation you can kind of get behind. He's a very complex character. His plan and motivation stem from both empathy and pure evil, mixed with his unquestionable god complex. One of the key differences between Thanos and the Avengers is that Thanos is willing to take huge risks in order to do what he believes is helping people, while the Avengers hold back and are full of indecision. That could also stem from the fact that Thanos is a solo dude, whereas the Avengers want to decide everything as a group. The way Thanos is presented makes me think he's almost not even a villain, more an anti-hero. Don't get me wrong, Thanos does some things that absolutely does cement him as a villain. If Batman wouldn't do it, they're a villain, and there is one scene that I really don't like narratively with Thanos, and that's the scene where he killed Gamora. It's entirely possible that she could come back. There's theories out there that her soul is simply inside the Soul Stone and she can be returned, but that remains to be seen. In the scene where he has to sacrifice her to get the stone, we see him really contemplate the action, even shedding a tear. I get that it's totally within Thanos' character to kill her for the stone because he will literally not let anything stand in his way from him achieving his goal, but I really wish this scene went a different way. When he corners the different groups of Avengers guarding the remaining stones he seeks, he resorts to a life or death ultimatum. Every time. Give me the stone or your buddy gets it, pal. Every time, the Avengers cave. Even Loki himself caved when Thanos began to execute Thor. I would have loved it if in this scene Thanos ended up exhibiting the same weakness as the Avengers, almost putting him on the same moral plane as the heroes by refusing to kill Gamora and continuing on without the Soul Stone. He already has 5 stones. Could he not have resorted to doing things a harder way to prevent the death of his daughter? I don't know how he'd continue the rest of the movie from that point given what happens at the ending, which required all 6 stones, but I would have loved it if he showed some form of weakness and saved Gamora over gaining more power. Even still, Thanos is unquestionably the deepest, most engaging Marvel villain I've seen in the MCU. Two characters who are noticeably different in Infinity War are Thor and Captain America. Tony Stark is a little more aggressive and pissed off than he normally is too, but we've seen his troubled personality in Iron Man 3. I like that aspect of Iron Man 3. Shame the rest of the movie was about as good as waking up in Chris Brown's body and realising you're a disgusting wife-beating cunt. That's another argument for another day though. But yeah, these three characters are the only Avengers to have had 3 movies, so their arcs have made them battered and bruised, emotionally and physically. I like that Thor and Cap are noticeably angrier and distant than in previous movies. This is especially a huge difference for Thor, given his last outing was pretty much a straight up comedy. Hemsworth portrays a Thor who just seems like he's really been through the ringer and he's just sick of everything. He's not holding back. A telling moment is when he's talking to Rocket and he proclaims that he's going to exact revenge on Thanos regardless of the odds because hey, he's got nothing to lose. Somebody with nothing to lose is incredibly dangerous and troubled. Thor is a perfect example of both. He shows this throughout the movie. He's undoubtedly much stronger and angrier than he was before, and his new axe helps him absolutely decimate waves of enemies with ease. On the other hand, Captain America is different in the other direction. In previous iterations, he's always been this kind of upbeat patriotic guy who has a stiff upper lip and a chip on his shoulder. In Infinity War, he's kind of quiet and distant. Because of the events which transpired in Civil War, Captain America is now not even Captain America. If you've seen the movie, did you notice he never calls himself Captain America to any of the new people he meets? He calls himself Steve Rogers. Cap has completely lost his identity of the American hero, the soldier. He's just Steve Rogers. This is further shown by the new suit too, with the blacked out star and the lack of colour. Just like the suit, his outlook on life is devoid of colour and hope, but yet he still fights, and that's what makes him a hero. Even still though, Steve Rogers in Infinity War is a very bleak character, and that's what this film is. Bleak. But I'll talk more about that tone later. Aside from the main plot of the movie, you know, the big purple guy whose chin you could land a fucking 747 on is about to destroy half the universe, there is some thoroughly enjoyable side plots involving different pockets of heroes. Thor, Rocket and Groot go off in search of a new hammer, or as it turns out, axe. This whole sequence is a rebirth of Thor. He rises from the ashes of Asgard with a brand new eye, even if it is a different colour, and a new weapon to boot, filled with vengeance and drive. The Thor we are introduced to in the first movie takes his powers for granted and has to earn Mjolnir after he's had everything handed to him with a silver spoon his entire life. In Infinity War, Thor takes his destiny into his own hands by going out there and forging his own weapon to rival Mjolnir, and to do so he has to endure the heat and power of a fucking collapsing star, and he does so without question. In previous movies, Thor was a god by default. In this movie, you feel like Thor is making himself a god once more. He's not just earning the right, he's creating the right. What was also enjoyable about this sequence was a very small bit of character development for Rocket. It's easy to miss because the focus is on Thor throughout the scene, but there's a moment where Rocket decides he's going to get to know Thor while they're mid-flight. He asks Thor about his past and if he has family or friends, to which Thor replies saying they're all dead. Rocket then looks a little sad and says, "Are you sure you're up for this?" That one line is huge character development for Rocket. Let me take you back to Guardians 1 and you'll see why.
It's just to cover my loss.
Oh, boo-hoo! My wife and child are dead.
See? Drax has lost his wife and child and Rocket mocks him to make a point when he could have showed empathy. With Thor, he seems genuinely concerned for Thor's well-being and questions whether he can even fight. Now, I'm not saying Rocket is by any means not a horrible savage joker anymore, we can definitely see that he still is, but he at least has some compassion now and has learned to pick his moments for jokes. I also enjoyed Gamora and Thanos' storyline. Gamora has so much beef with Thanos she could open her own Outback restaurant, but they still managed to have some enjoyable moments, especially the moment they met. Thanos is busy wiping out half of her planet, pulls her to one side, gives her a gift. Alright, yeah, it's a double-bladed knife, not something every kid wants for Christmas. And then he turns her head away as her people are executed. This conjured so many different emotions. You kind of think, oh, look at Thanos being kind to her and stopping her from saying all those atrocities. But then you think, hang on, it's Thanos himself that's committing these atrocities. You want to hate him for it, but he also says that his actions actually helped that planet and it is now thriving. This all plays into it earlier when I was saying how he's a complex character. He's effective and genuinely does everything for a good cause, but he does it via chaos and murder, and we can't be having that. Another side plot was Scarlet Witch and Vision's romance, which I didn't care for too much, but it did lead to an absolutely brutal climax. She is forced to kill Vision herself in order to destroy the Mind Stone and stop Thanos from taking it. Thanos pretends like he's struggling to get to her and lets her murder her boyfriend before savagely rewinding time and showing she went through that pain for absolutely no reason because Thanos was always going to get the stone anyway. Again, that feeds into the whole idea of the movie being utterly fucking grim. On the flip side though, throughout the movie we do have the funny storyline of Bruce Banner having the superhero equivalent of not being able to get it up as he struggles to unleash the Hulk for the entire movie. There's definitely more to this story than simply comedy, but for this movie, that's all it was. You'd think it wouldn't work with the rest of the movie being so bleak, but the writers managed to mingle these tones very well and it worked. Now, if you've seen the movie already, you know that this wouldn't be a review without talking about that ending. If you don't want the ending spoiled, then turn away now, because this is the biggest spoilery section of the review. So yeah, the Russo Brothers and even Marvel themselves really didn't mess about. Don't get me wrong, I think everybody over the age of 12 can figure out that those who pulled a Voldemort and disintegrated into thin air are not gone forever. Maybe some are, but I'd say the vast majority aren't. But the way they did it, man. It was the way they did it that made it so good. This is a weird analogy, but it kind of makes me think of it like WWE. You can never convince me that WWE is real, that these guys beat the shit out of each other and unleash moves called the neck breaker without actually breaking a neck and all the other ridiculous shit. But you can package it in a way that makes me enjoy it, even if I know it's not real. Just tell a story with it. Infinity War does exactly that. You can never make me believe that Rey Mysterio could beat Kane in a straight up fight, but if you write a narrative that makes me want to believe it and present it in such a way that it's just excellent to watch, then I will have an emotional response to it, regardless of how ridiculous it is. The way Infinity War plays out at the end was magical. No music, just quiet chaos as we watch some of our most beloved heroes vanish into existence. Of course I know they'll be back, but it gave me an emotional response. To use the phrase the crazy millennials use these days, I was shook. All because of the delivery. The biggest sell was Spider-Man's death. That shit was horrifying. Like, I can deal with Spider-Man dying, but what was majorly uncomfortable was watching Tom Holland as Peter Parker beg Tony to save him and sort of act very cowardly and scared when he was dying. Superheroes are often infallible in the face of danger, but Spidey completely crumbled because he's just a fucking kid. Tom Holland himself even looks like a damn child, so that was pretty hard hitting, even for me, and I'm 25. Imagine being a 7-year-old kid and seeing Spider-Man die in such a real and brutal way on screen. It's just crazy. Marvel took a big risk having this death play out the way it did. Everybody else kind of just vanished or even quipped a joke as they fell, but Spider-Man tries to cling to life until the last moment. I knew he disintegrates into the wind, but it was a bit too real. I saw a little girl leaving the screen as I was leaving, and I just thought, man, you poor child. Marvel having the sheer audacity and ability to pull off such a stunt shows a truly significant time in cinema history, not just for superhero movies but for the industry as a whole. Infinity War has shown that with the correct writing you can do whatever the hell you like with a franchise and audiences can enjoy it. It's rare that you see a movie and you know it's going to be a pop culture icon, but this is one of the first movies I've seen in years where I just know it's going to go down in history like Alien, Back to the Future and Jaws. I mentioned earlier how the film is bleak, and the ending definitely feeds into that feeling, but the whole movie itself is completely overshadowed with this dark tone. It still has good moments of lightheartedness and comedy in it, but there's just this overwhelming sense of dread throughout as pretty much every single one of our heroes fails. DC is often associated with being dark, which it is, but DC is dark in a kind of teenage emo My Chemical Romance style. That's fine, I think it works in the DC universe, but the Infinity War version of dark is more a feeling of hopelessness and defeat, as opposed to brooding characters and dark imagery. Ironically, Infinity War is full of colour, unlike the bleak grey bland look of Civil War. Any of you see that video on why Marvel films look so poor? I disagree with it, but Civil War did look like total dogshit, and that didn't have such a grim overtone to it in the narrative. Infinity War has our heroes completely struggling against a genocidal tyrant who had all of the power. Does that remind you of a certain time in history? Captain America should certainly be feeling a sense of deja vu. It manages to have this bleak tone while still being an entertaining movie, and it doesn't feel depressing. Marvel is really grown up and isn't scared to do more adult themes. One of the biggest accolades I can give Infinity War is that I found it completely unpredictable. Aside from the deaths of Loki and Gamora. I mean, there wasn't really much more they could do with Loki, and Gamora had to have some kind of arc with Thanos in this movie that would more than likely result in her death. I didn't know if anybody else would die though, and that played into the unpredictability. This is the first Marvel movie where I believed anybody could be for the chop, except for maybe one or two people, so every scene had me on my toes. I really thought Thor was going to buy it at least 3 times. I know that originally this movie was called Infinity War Part 1 and there was going to be a Part 2 in 2019, but when they scrapped that idea it left me thinking what was going to happen in this movie. Was Thanos going to be defeated and something else happens in the next one? I really had no idea where this movie was going or how it was going to be resolved. To my surprise, Thanos won at the end of the movie. The villain actually won. Sure, I think Doctor Strange has conned him a bit and we'll see how he's going to fail in the next Avengers, but just in this movie, Thanos sits victorious and relaxed in the final shot while our heroes die and look utterly defeated. I've never seen that in a superhero movie before. Ever. It leaves me completely guessing what's going to happen next, and while it's not the first movie in the Marvel franchise where the villain wins, technically Baron Zemo succeeded in breaking the Avengers up in Civil War, it is truly a landmark in the franchise. Like Thanos' ideal universe and the weapon he gives to Gamora, the movie is perfectly balanced. Not only does it give more than a fair amount of screen time to every hero, but it also manages to mesh the tones between them very well. You know the Guardians are going to come on when you hear some catchy music, even if it does just come at a random time in an otherwise bleak film. It worked really well. Seeing Quill and the rest of the group interact and joke with Thor, Stark, Spidey and Doctor Strange was very funny. The writers have done a terrific job merging all of these characters together, and they definitely chose the right heroes to combine with one another for the best outcome. I struggle to say how the comedic Guardians would mix with the likes of Thor and Doctor Strange, but they really pulled it off. Rocket and Thor had a very interesting relationship. It was nice to see the father-son dynamic of Tony Stark and Peter Parker as Star-Lord and Doctor Strange watched on. I also loved seeing the close-knit group of Team Cap try and work things out with Black Panther. Everything just worked. I've heard people say they felt the movie was rushed or the sheer amount of characters pushed some other characters to the wayside a little, but I absolutely disagree. I think the Russo Brothers have done a tremendous job balancing everybody. I really didn't feel like anybody lacked the screen time they deserved, including Thanos. I've also heard a few people raise concerns that some characters do things that are out of character, possibly because these characters have been handled by different writers and directors in the past. The biggest criticism I've heard is of Star-Lord. At one stage in the movie, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Spidey and Mantis all have Thanos trapped and are attempting to remove his gauntlet. During the exchange, Star-Lord discovers that Gamora is dead and Thanos explains he had to kill her. Star-Lord then punches Thanos, freeing him of the grasp of the other heroes, and he regains control of the gauntlet. This is the moment some people are criticising, saying it has ruined Star-Lord's character that he could be so ignorant and selfish and doom the galaxy by punching Thanos. This action was absolutely not against character at all. Peter Quill has always been a selfish, ignorant arsehole who lets emotions get the better of him. While these aspects of him are played for comedy, they are still there. This is highlighted very strongly in Guardians 2. When Peter learns that his father, who is a god by the way, murdered his mother, he immediately goes to his blasters and shoots him to bits without question, not thinking about what his dad may do in retaliation or the fact that, you know, he's possibly just murdered his dad. If he was Luke Skywalker, he'd be right over to the dark side by now. So it's totally believable that when he learns that Thanos killed Gamora, the woman he's loved since the first movie, it's perfectly natural for Peter to respond with unbridled rage. I think a character arc for him in Guardians 3 may be to learn to control himself more, but the Peter we get in Infinity War is the Peter we had from Guardians 2, and he did absolutely nothing out of character. You might not like it, but that's the fallible, imperfect side of Peter coming right to the surface. Not all heroes can be perfect. Infinity War is about 80% battle scene and every single one of them is exhilarating and thoroughly entertaining. In both Avengers movies we've seen different combo moves when certain heroes have teamed up, and this movie does not disappoint in the same regard. Doctor Strange has some very interesting combos with Iron Man, Star-Lord and Spidey, and the way they take down Thanos as a team was brilliant, all using their different strengths to chip away at each part of Thanos. I've watched a lot of movies where long battle scenes can eventually become a bit boring, but Infinity War does not suffer this at all. Every fight scene is engaging and full of great moments. One in particular I loved was when Thor arrived in Wakanda and did a huge AoE attack with Stormbreaker. I don't like giving out points for badassery, but fuck it, that was awesome. Avengers Infinity War is the best movie Marvel have ever made, by a comfortable margin. Not only have the Russo brothers managed to blend a large roster of heroes, introduce and successfully flesh out a new villain, and deliver a well-balanced entertaining movie, but they also did it in style, taking risks and throwing in a lot of mature themes. I've seen a lot of memes like this, and I think we can all agree that because people feel this way about the movie, it's going to be talked about for a few years to come. You know when you see a movie that it's probably not going to be relevant in a few months' time, but I just get the feeling that Infinity War is not only a huge landmark in Marvel or superhero movie territory, but in pop culture as a whole. There's a lot to think and talk about in this movie. It's fairly unique in its setup and it has huge ups and downs which make it feel like a real blockbuster thrill ride. I commend Marvel for taking a big risk making such a huge movie in their franchise mature themed, with deep and complex villain motivations and a character death that is delivered in such a raw and brutal way. I want to give this movie 5 out of 5, but that still seems too little. Maybe I'll take the Guitar Hero approach and give it gold frames. Avengers Infinity War gets 5 gold frames out of 5. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Film Rant.